It's Pride Sunday. Pride Sunday. Testify to love. Love is all there is. Love is all there is. And we are learning that more and more as a human race. We're learning that love is all there is. So this week marks, as I said earlier in the service, it marks the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots in New York City, which lasted from June 28, 1969 until July 1st, 1969. And just in case you aren't completely familiar with this historical event and its importance in the history of the gay rights movement, let me just share some of the basic information. You know, there are documentaries and personal accounts that you can access and watch to learn a little bit more, but just the bare minimum today. So 50 years ago, being gay or lesbian for most people meant that you had to hide. You had to hide. You hid your relationships if you could find a partner willing to hide with you. You hid within the establishments that were a part of your life, your work, your family, your community. It was dangerous to let anyone know about your sexual expression. You lied about your activities, you lied about your friends, you definitely lied about the most beautiful and powerful part of life. You lied about your love. And you did all this hiding because being gay was illegal, with varying punishments depending on what state you lived in. From fines to imprisonment, it was illegal. And you did this hiding to avoid harassment and violence and discrimination. You could be fired for being gay, or even the rumor that you were gay, you could be fired. And you could be disowned by your family regardless of how young you were. You could be kicked out. There are many, many stories of children being kicked out of their homes for this. And you were likely to become a pariah back then, with no social support or acceptance, much less opportunities in life. And the better your ability to hide 50 years ago, the better your chances of acceptance and social survival. And being gay in a small town, where everyone is kind of seen more and known more, it was nearly impossible 50 years ago. So gay men and lesbians migrated to the larger cities where anonymity was more possible, places like San Francisco and Los Angeles and Chicago and New York City. And those cities became gathering spots in the late 60s for these hiding people to hide with each other. In these larger cities, it was easier to find others to hide with, others to partner with, others to build community with, and find safe places to have fun together, to live together, to express. It was easier to find a place to belong. And belonging is a key component of being human. Without a sense of belonging, there's a dwindling hope and desperation kicks in. So the Stonewall Inn was just such a place of belonging. You know, gays and lesbians gathered there, and that's a bar, and they would gather there to have social support and community. But not only just gays and lesbians, but people expressing non-conforming gender expressions. Drag queens and transvestites and cross-dressers were also gathering there. And there was relative comfort in the Stonewall Inn, in that part of New York City. And for the most part, the police, it was illegal in New York as well, but the police pretty much ignored this blatant expression of gay life that was happening around Manhattan and happening in Greenwich Village. What the truth was is the mafia owned the Stonewall. The mafia owned the Stonewall Inn. And the owners of the Stonewall Inn paid the police to ignore what was going on so that they could charge exorbitant prices for their drinks and things like that. And they could extort the patrons for money, and they would threaten to out them to their family and their businesses and things like that. So the safety, even the safety found at the Stonewall and in those in gay relationships or varying gender expressions was actually very small. There was some safety, but not a lot. But in June of 1969, there were a series of police raids. So the police would come to these establishments and go in and turn the lights on and arrest people and harass people for being there. And they would charge them with various crimes. Mostly they were just harassing them. And despite the fact that the mafia was paying the bribes, the police were still doing this. So the oppression and mistreatment kind of came to a head 50 years ago on this weekend. So on the 28th of June in 1969, violence erupted because these 9 police officers showed up at the Stonewall Inn and began this harassing again. And violence erupted inside the building, but also out in the streets because they had just had enough. So the streets of Greenwich Village became this riot place, and what would later be referred to as the Stonewall Riots or the Stonewall Uprising began that night. The gay community was angry. They were angry that their hard-earned small bit of comfort and community was being violently disrupted on a regular basis. So that night, eventually in the riots, the original 9 police officers went into the inn to hide there because the crowd was getting violent. And they locked themselves in to protect themselves from the swarming crowds because more and more people were gathering on the streets in this protest. And the rioters responded by setting the building on fire with the 9 police officers inside. So what happened is the additional officers were obviously called to the scene, and they went in and rescued the 9 police officers. So none of them died. They were able to escape the burning building. And eventually peace was restored a couple of days later on July 1st. But there were days of unrest around that. And these events are considered the beginning of the gay liberation movement and the modern fight for LGBTQ rights in the United States. So after the riots, villagers of Greenwich Village, residents organized into activism groups to concentrate efforts on finding greater freedom for the gay community and others marginalized and harassed in society at large. So this riot was an impetus for these organizations to begin. And 1 year later, the first gay pride marches took place in the cities that I named earlier, commemorating the anniversary of the riots. And every year, gay pride events are held annually throughout the world to mark the progress that has been made since the Stonewall riots. So today, in our spiritual community, we join in that celebration of the great strides that have been made for our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, but we also stand with them in the vulnerability that I talked about earlier, knowing that further progress is being called forth by very, very current events. You know, we stand with them demanding that every person on the planet, regardless of sexual or gender expression, are included in the spiritual truth of oneness, and that what happens to one of us happens to all of us. Any right denied anyone is a right denied me. We stand and know that. And that is a part of the reason I wanted to talk about. And I asked all of us to join in the experience of Pride this year. I just want to let me just raise that level of awareness in Tampa just one more notch. You know, it's about oneness. It's about oneness. So last weekend, St. Pete held their annual Pride celebration. Maybe some of you went to that, but other cities like Tampa hold their Pride celebrations at other times of the year, primarily to avoid the oppressive heat of the summer, which is not the most pleasant month to be standing around outside in wigs and long dresses. So, and so in Tampa at the end of March, this community was represented by a group of us wearing these very shirts. This is the very shirt I wore that day. And our message to the LGBTQ community that day was that spirituality embraces all forms of sexual and gender identity and expression. And we wanted everyone to know that spirit is available, even though many, many people in this part of society have long ago left organized religion due to the messages of exclusion and damnation that many churches espouse. So that's that event. We gave out over 400 peace necklaces, and we looked each one in the eye as we put those necklaces around their necks, and we invited them to remember their divine spiritual wonderfulness, their fabulousness. And we did it as a gesture of the peace that is God. So I asked Lori to share some photographs of of us representing you at Pride. You can see the peace necklaces have our logo and stuff on them, and we gave them out. It was a wonderful experience. So Ellen and Donna and Becky organized the event, and in case you were unable to attend and participate, you were represented there. And these last two photographs are my favorite of the day. This man, I don't remember his name. I knew it that day, and I actually messaged him afterwards, but he was just beautifully expressing his feminine side and his gorgeous, gorgeous soul. And I had a wonderful time running some love energy with him that warm afternoon. It was very, very special. So in addition to simply sharing some history with you this morning, I also want to see if we can learn something personal as we take a closer look at one possible spiritual interpretation or perspective on the purpose of a riot, such as the one at the Stonewall Inn half a century ago. How can we make this whole thing relatable to us personally, even if we aren't a part of the LGBTQ community, which I know many of you aren't in this lifetime, you're not in that part of the world, but even if we are, how can we look at this through a spiritual lens? How can we take a look? So we begin that exploration by looking at the truth that all of us are on a path to finding greater freedom for ourselves on this human plane. We are all looking for freedom from some form of fear and oppression, whether this oppression seems to be coming at us from outside of ourselves or from within our own hearts and our own minds. Wherever that fear and oppression is coming from, it's our experience. And each one of us has something that is holding back, keeping us small, preventing us from running out into the streets of our lives in fearlessness and vulnerability. Each one of us is playing it safe somewhere in our experiences, hiding from the truth of who we are. We have the longing deep inside to be braver, to have more courage, to step out more fully into our magnificence. And we have a tiny glimpse of that magnificence inside of ourselves. You know, perhaps somewhere in our lives we found a small way of expressing this part of ourselves, maybe with a single person, or maybe a small group of close friends. But we're desiring a bigger way to show more of the world, who we really are, who we envision ourselves to be. Do you see where I'm going with this? We all have something that we want to bring out of the closet. So perhaps you have a creative idea that you want to share with the world, but you're playing it safe, only showing it to one or two people. You're terrified to bring it front and center in your expression, or perhaps you secretly want to change careers, but you're scared to find something new for fear of failure, or looking foolish to your friends and family for pushing the limits or starting over at your age. Perhaps you want a greater expression of life and love, but you're scared to talk to him or her about it. Perhaps you want to speak your truth to someone, but you fear rejection or ridicule or even violence. Perhaps you're identifying yourself as a spiritual being or a peaceful being or a generous being, but you feel like a fraud because you really aren't living that way when no one's looking. Perhaps that is your oppression. Every single one of us has something like that. I know that is true because you are alive. At least to my eyes up here, you look alive. You might want to check the breathing of the person next to you. Actually, look at each other and remind yourself you're alive. Remind each other you're alive. You're alive. You're alive. And if you are alive, and now I know you are still growing. You are still pushing the edges of your experience toward greater wholeness, towards greater love, towards greater freedom. You, like everyone else, are trying to be more powerful and heart-centered, as we talked about last week. You are growing. And as you grow, you become restless with the things that limit you. You become resistant to the people that hold you back, with the job that keeps you stifled, with the naysayers and the fault finders. Everything, unlike the bigger version of yourself that you see as possible, becomes so irritating. And what happens eventually is you have a Stonewall moment. If you don't take steps towards your greater vision for yourself, you will eventually try to burn the building down. Someday, something inside you will rise up and start a proverbial riot. And you know you're in a Stonewall moment when you just walk out of a friendship that has stretched itself to its limit. You know you're in a Stonewall moment when you quit the job, or you stand up to someone who isn't communicating with your highest self, or you somewhat suddenly decide to move to a place you really want to live, or you finally stick with that health plan the doctor has been trying to get you to do for years. You've reached your Stonewall moment when the current status quo simply is not going to work one more day, and by God, today is the day it changes. Every one of us can think of a Stonewall moment we've had in our lifetime, and what is interesting is that if we remember to write it down, and we look back a year later, just like they did in New York City, we'll be able to see how much change has occurred in 1 year, or 2 years, or 3 years, or 50 years. How much progress has been made in that area of your life after that Stonewall moment. How much more freedom can you celebrate now after more time has passed? More freedom comes after a Stonewall moment because the universe responds to a new choice and a new thought. That's what we teach around here. When you take a stand for something greater for yourself, life begins to shift in a new direction, a higher direction. The complete transformation sometimes takes a long, long time. But if you pause from time to time and you take an assessment, you will see the progress that you have made. You know, I've never shared my own coming out story. Never have, at least not from the pulpit. So let me see if I can illustrate this spiritual principle a little bit by telling you just a tad bit about my personal journey in this area. So as some of you in the room know, some people have been around the whole time, I figured out I was a lesbian around age 18. And as I admitted it to myself, I realized that this would not be well-received information in the fundamentalist Christian household that I grew up in, nor the faith community that I was raised in. So I stayed away from them until my father passed away. He passed when I was 19, so I didn't have to wait a long time. But about 10 months after his death, I came out to my mother. She was beautiful. Mom, if you're listening, you were beautiful. It was a hard conversation. But she was encouraging to me, and she gave me some advice. She said, honey, move to a major city. Move to a big city where you can be as free as you can be. It was great advice. So I did that, and I decided to be as truthful about my life as any situation would allow. And that was a big decision in 1983. I was out as my college environment could withstand, and actually I kind of pushed some limits there. And a few years into my career, at age 25, I had been closeted in a couple of jobs right out of college, but at 25 I started a new career, and I decided this time I would not be closeted at all. And somehow I had the courage to not let fear rule my life at work. And I told my superiors I was a lesbian, and I never looked back. And if others around me discussed their weekend activities or talked about their spouses or partners, I just did the same. If spouses were invited, I brought my girlfriend, right? I brought her too. If I felt held back, I spoke up. I pushed for an anti-discrimination clause, naming gays and lesbians in our company policies, and it happened. My partner and I were the very first lesbian couple to register as domestic partners in the city of Atlanta when that law passed in 1993. We were one of the first to have a child as a gay couple in the Southeast. 2 years later, it was still illegal for me to get pregnant when I did, but I did it anyway. Becky and I got married early in the legislation process, and we went to Vermont to do it because it was still illegal in Georgia where we lived. This is not old history. This is really relatively new history. But this was a personal journey of evolution for me, step by step, layer by layer, year by year. I transformed and I made progress, and I made progress toward greater freedom and authenticity. And I stand here open with you all as my spiritual community. I stand here completely open because there were several Stonewall moments along the way where I took a new stand for myself, and I stand for myself here. And that is what happened in the wider gay rights movement, and it is what happens in the civil rights movement and in any other movement that pushes towards progression and greater equality, greater oneness, and greater freedom. And it's what's happening in your own personal journey toward your own magnificence. And here are the steps that I encourage you to take, to go through each time. Wake up, look up, speak up, and show up, and then repeat. Wake up. First, you have to wake up. You have to wake up to your own sense of limitation. You have to wake up and see what or who seems to hold you back. You have to wake up to your habits that are keeping you small. You have to wake up to the situations that you're comfortable in but are confining you. You have to wake up to where you're living in fear. You have to face the truth of your surroundings and your life. And you have to realize that even though this situation has contained your greatest freedom so far, you are not done evolving. Then I encourage you to look up. If you were here for that talk on Easter about the cross, you know what I'm talking about. But you move to the middle of your life and you look up, and you look up. If you're stuck in a human experience and you've exhausted every means available to you to get free of your limitation, look up. Look up. Raise your eyes from the problem and look to Spirit for inspiration and ideas. Raise your eyes from the problem and see a new possibility for yourself. Look up and remember you are never alone. Look up and trust that God is calling you to something greater and that the universe will rise to meet your step towards your next level of existence. Look up. And then the next step is speak up. You got to speak your word over your life. You must utter these words. I deserve better. You must speak your way free. Speak your way higher. You must say, enough. I've had enough. You've got to look at your family, your coworkers, your boss, your doctor, and most importantly, the mirror, and speak your truth. I am ready to change. I am ready to grow. I am determined that 1 year from now, I will not be the same. I will not be here. I may not know where I'll be, but I won't be here. It's going to look different. My world is about to shift, and I am transforming. Your word is powerfully creative, especially when spoken with a Stonewall conviction, with a Stonewall sense of determination and grit, especially when your word is spiritually motivated and inspired. Speak up. And finally, the last step is show up. You have to show up for the riot and participate in the change steps required on your part. You have to show up for the hard conversations. You have to show up in your vulnerability and your authenticity and do something different. You have to show up even when you want to throw up. You have to show up when you feel nervous about being a beginner again. You have to show up for the re-education and how to live more powerfully. You have to show up for the class, for the seminar, for the moving van, for the doctor visits, for the hard choices. You have to just keep making those choices that take you closer and closer and closer and closer to your desired way of living, toward your freedom. Wake up, look up, speak up, and show up. And what we do for ourselves personally, we're invited to do for the greater good of the whole. When one of us achieves greater freedom, and this is truth in the wider world and it's truth in our lives, when one of us achieves greater freedom, we all do. When one person comes out of the proverbial closet, we leave the door open for others to escape the closet of fear and limitation too. It's how it happens because we're all one. And here in spiritual community where you already feel a sense of belonging, look at your shirts, you already feel like you belong here. We can stand with each other for personal empowerment and freedom. We can join each other's riots and cheer each other on as we burn down the houses of our limitation and our fear. We can know for each other a higher truth of empowerment and love right here. And year after year, we will be here together and we will watch each other transform and fly higher. We will continue to celebrate each other's milestones and healings and breakthroughs. We will not be the same a year from now. None of us will. We will keep each other on the path of waking up and looking up. And we will encourage each other to speak up. And together we will show up. And we will remind each other to remember that God is always faithful. God is always present, even in the moments of challenge and resistance, but also in the moments of breakthroughs and progress. Remember, Friday night, a few of us went to see Lauren Daigle in concert, and her songs are just poetry, and I want to share one of them in closing. It's called Remember. It says, in the darkest hour, when I cannot breathe, fear is on my chest, the weight of the world's on me, and everything is crashing down, everything I have known. When I wonder if I'm all alone, I remember. Even when my own eyes could not see, God was there, always there. I will lift my eyes, even in the pain. Above all the lies, I know God can make a way. I have seen giants fall. I have seen mountains move. I have seen waters part because of God. I remember. God has always been faithful to me. I remember, even when my own eyes could not see, God was there, always there. I can't stop thinking about. I can't.
In the darkest hour, when I cannot breathe, fear is on my chest, the weight of the world on me. Everything is crashing down, everything that I have known. When I wonder if I'm all alone, I remember. I can't stop thinking about God's goodness. I can't stop thinking about. I can't stop thinking about God's goodness. I can't stop thinking about. I can't stop thinking about. I can't stop thinking about God's goodness. Can't stop thinking about. I can't stop thinking about. I can't stop thinking about God's goodness. I remember.
Thank you, Cheryl. So as we head out to lunch today together, let us stand proudly in unity and show the world what it looks like to be surrounded by a loving community as we walk through life, as we grow and as we evolve and as we live. We've got to join hands as a spiritual community and a spiritual family where all are welcome and celebrated with pride. So I love you all, and so it is.
So it is.